We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
We do podcasts.
We do video casts.
Quizzes.
Crowdcasts with famous authors.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you will never forget.
There's only one way to make sure you get all of this, you get it in full, and you get it first.
And that's by becoming a supporter on Patreon.
Details here.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Another Word in Your Attic, where, as you know, Beatles records tend to crop up with a delicious regularity, and that should be nailed on in this edition, because we're talking to the two guys behind the Nothing Is Real podcast. So I'm hoping for at least half an hour on Hey Bulldog, and you know my name, look up the number. So welcome aboard, Jason Carty and Stephen Cockcroft. Very nice to see you both.
Hello, gentlemen. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you. And you're both, one of you, Jason, you're in Dublin, I think, and Stephen, you're just outside Dublin. Is that right?
I'm in Belfast. I'm just outside.
Belfast. Sorry, Belfast.
Just outside Ireland, and I'm in Dublin.
Yeah,
don't what have I opened up here?
little bit of politics.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, tell us about the podcast. How long have you been doing the podcast?
It's been about 2 years now.
Yeah.
So we started back in May 2019, but the kind of the roots of it go back a lot further. I think that the Beatles. If you're somebody who's into the Beatles, it's a conversation that can never really end. If you find a kindred spirit who, obsesses about certain corners of the Beatles story, then you can really, roll up your sleeves and get stuck in. We'd myself and Stephen originally met actually 10 years ago at the first and last Dublin Word Mingle, and
really?
that's our origin story.
Yeah, it's your fault.
Very touching. It's our fault. We created it.
Yes.
We started the whole party. That's great. But what makes you different from? I mean, there are, to be honest, quite a few Beatles podcasts. So what's your unique take on it? You're not just Beatles, are you? I mean, you're right through to the present day. So it's it's the films of Ringo Starr, and it's McCartney 3, and it's the whole span of anything related to the Beatles, isn't it?
Yeah, everything. Well, I suppose we for our sins we entered a Beatles quiz in Dublin, which they have a sort of mini Beatles fest every year. The Beatles played in Dublin once.
Oh, really?
So,
is there a plaque?
Yes,
there is a plaque. The building is no longer there. The Adelphi cinema is no longer there.
But the plaque is there.
Oh, that's lovely.
So they have a sort of little mini festival every weekend, every year, and Jason and I entered the quiz, and we came 5th or 6th or something, and then we entered again and we came 4th, and eventually we won the quiz, and then Jason rang me up and said, we won the quiz. The next logical step is a podcast.
Obviously.
Obviously.
That's what happened with Dave and I.
So the difficulty was when we entered the quiz the next year, we thought, well, if we don't win this year, we're going to have to hand the keys of the podcast over to the winner.
To the winners.
But we did okay. We gave him second. I can't remember.
I think we took. You take for granted, I think, some of the knowledge that you just take in on stuff like the Beatles or other bits of pop culture as well, and you kind of think, well, surely everybody knows. Like, one of the questions was, how long is Revolution 9? And so you kind of think there's
Go on. That was one of the questions. What an extraordinary question!
It was a tiebreaker question.
It was a tiebreaker question. Or what was the shortest?
Is it 8 minutes 9 seconds? It's not, is it?
I think I said 8:20, and that got me the tiebreaker.
Right, okay, you win.
What is the shortest track they ever?
So
recorded?
go on. What is the shortest? Oh, I've just seen the
I tell you, it'll be. Why don't we do it in the road? No,
right.
Yes, it will it?
I said I will, but that wasn't right. It's Her Majesty.
Of course.
23 seconds. So there you go.
Oh,
does that count as a track? Because it's not on the label or on the LP, is it?
Well, it has a separate publishing.
Good point, Dave, in our defence. I'm going to be in a bad mood all day now for getting that wrong. It's amazing how the inner schoolboy in you is kind of wound up by this kind of thing.
I feel I'm exactly the same. I'm exactly the same.
So funny.
I just think it's extraordinary. The Beatles played in Ireland once. The building's been raised, but there's a plaque. and people gather
once a
every
year.
To celebrate the
probably
date.
with acoustic guitars and wigs.
to compete with each other about, kind of really kind of deep end stuff. It's just extraordinary.
Well, you see, they only played in Dublin once, but Belfast's claim to fame is they played here 3 times.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Twice in one day, and it was the biggest concert they ever played in the UK. There was a big venue in Belfast that held 8,000 people. This is when they were sort of playing, they were playing cinemas and things like
sure. So when are we talking about 1964 or something? Like that?
65, and they got 8,000 people in, 8,000 people out, and another 8,000 people. So they played 16 to 16,000 people in one day.
So what was the name of that venue then?
The King's Hall.
Oh, right. Is that still there?
It's no longer there. But
presumably you can spot the location by the quiz that's going on.
Yes, the permanent quiz.
Once a year.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It was a beautiful building, and it was before you had sort of modern concert venues. It was a sort of held. The agricultural festival was always held there every year, but it was the big sort of Ideal Home exhibition was there, but.
Oh, that's extraordinary.
Anyway,
that is, isn't it? So
but,
look, on a really general level, if you've been doing a podcast for 2 years, what sort of things? Give me an example of some of the things that you've discovered about the Beatles. Some really major revelations that you never knew, or things that made you modify your view about them, or whatever. You must have come across things that people have told you, or just bits of information that you never discovered before.
I think we both have our own individual favorite bits. I really enjoyed. We did 3 episodes across last year about the Beatles Anthology, which I found fascinating, because you kind of think, well, they split up and then nothing ever happens again, and that but actually the Beatles Anthology has enough ins and outs to it, and enough almost aggro associated to it to match any of the best of their time. So the way we did it, we kind of looked at that kind of 68 to 92 period where Neil Aspinall's trying to get it made, and they're collating, but they don't exist legally, the Beatles, in a coherent way. And then once they kind of get this kind of new wave existence, trying to get it over the line and trying to get agreement on things, it all reaches that point in November 95, and then it just falls apart, and Paul and George kind of start sniping at each other again. And it's really, they push this boulder up the hill, and once they do it, it again collapses a second time. So I really enjoyed looking at the anthology.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's an unusual one. Yeah, it is. And again, a lot of it was never resolved, was it? There was the great thing about whether Carnival of Light might be on.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah,
which was vetoed, I think, by George in the end, wouldn't it?
George vetoed Carnival of Light. So Anthology 2 was supposed to come out. The 3 Anthology albums were supposed to come out in 6 months, and they ended up coming out across 11 months. Yeah. And Carnival of Light was pulled from the second volume, and Paul rearranged the track list at the last time. But if you talk about one specific fact that I found really kind of heartbreaking about the anthology, is that, Paul in particular is banging the drum for Free as a Bird and getting the 3 guys back together, and here it comes. And on the week that the single comes out, and there's this battle for it to get to number 1, Paul finds out for the first time that Linda McCartney has cancer. And you kind of feel from a very human point of view, all that work to get to that point, to get the band back together, and then to have something as devastatingly personal as that happen to you.
Yes, that's terrible.
You get into deep philosophy at that point. What really matters in life, Yeah.
No, sure.
Are there any, Steve, we're going to come to you in a moment for yours, but are there any, apart from Carnival of Light's not a really good example, are there any known recordings by the Beatles that we still haven't heard might one day hear? I mean, I can't be much left.
Well, there's the question is whether ever the Beatles estate or the Beatles Incorporated want to go down a Bob Dylan route of saying, here's every take of everything ever recorded in the vaults, because you can still look at something like 2019's Abbey Road box set, and even in the sleeve notes, they're saying, this is take X, but take Y was really good. But you think, well, put take Y on the box then, So I think there's a core of people, mainly people like myself, who just who want to just hear all of it. But it's a bit of a strip tease the way they're putting these things out,
Right.
Yeah, I find that very irritating, that they seem to replicate the running order of an album with alternate takes. Whereas I think it would be much more interesting to hear the development of a song. I'm fascinated. How did While My Guitar Gently Weeps get from that acoustic track to the full-blown rock track? There must be something in between. You know, it's a sort of Darwinism. Where's the evolution of that song? I want to see. I want to hear that. It's things like that. But we have to wait for the 60th and 75th anniversary box sets. And
so, Stephen, what about you? In the people you've interviewed and the information you've uncovered, give us some examples of things you found really revealing and extraordinary that you didn't know.
Well, one of the things that we came across, we always start off to say, well, we'll do an episode on this or do an episode on that, and it inevitably turns into a 2-part episode or a 3-part episode. So we decided we would take a particular song and we started to look at Revolution. And that, of course, extends into a 2-part episode. But one of the fascinating things was they had finished recording Revolution, or a take of Revolution, and they had acetates pressed up. And on the Friday, and the next day, John and Yoko flew to John's Island off the west coast of Ireland. And he took the acetate with him. And in the way that you do, he got a helicopter from the airport in Ireland to the island so that he could play this record on the island. But of course, they don't have a record player. So he dispatches the helicopter back to Westport to get me a record player. But they end up staying in a hotel, the Great Southern, is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's
off the west, in the west of Ireland. And that evening, the hotel had put on, a traditional Irish
showbandy type thing.
So you've got John and Yoko in their white suits and the beards and listening to traditional.
Have they put this on especially for them, or
especially for them?
Especially for them. Okay.
And when I say sort of a traditional evening, I don't mean sort of traditional authentic Irish music. I mean that sort of 1950s show band.
It's a show band.
Oh, brilliant!
It's Dickie Rock.
Dickie Rock, exactly. And then, a sort of reciprocal arrangement, John puts on the acetate of Revolution. That's the finale to the thing. But best of all, they then go back to London and they completely remake the track. So that particular track, that particular mix, has only been heard by the people in the hotel on that night, because the acetate sort of, they only play them a few times and they disappear. Sort of Mrs. O'Megan's from the hotel and Dickie Rock are the only people to have heard that. But I just think that's a very surreal end to the evening.
Oh, it is.
The hotel is still there, and on the wall, a plaque. And, of course.
It is, of course, a plaque. I hope
and
there's a
pictures.
I love those stories. There's a wonderful story that Derek Taylor told beautifully in his book about where they go off in the Rolls Royce of McCartney and Derek. Do you remember? And they go off to a village in Gloucestershire, randomly chosen by putting a pin in a map. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
That's on the way back from Yorkshire, isn't it?
Yeah, and they finish up in a pub with McCartney kind of playing Let It Be or something on the piano. And you think, again, there should be a plaque there. But I love those kind of random, extraordinary psychedelic adventures that they have. It's amazing.
It's the fact that there's so much going on. There's not a day that you can't. And the thing is, you can. There's the book that you can look up. A million books you can look up to find out what any one of the 4 of them were doing at a particular time on a particular date. That's what's so interesting. Yeah. What is interesting to me,
it's a very dense story, and I'm always kind of interested in these kind of little portal moments that kind of get them from being one thing to being another thing, because from my own point of view, as somebody who wasn't around when it happened, it's kind of hard to believe. He's terribly young. No, but it's kind of hard to believe it did happen. And I think that's kind of the phase of, Beatle fandom that we're getting to now, is that, most, you kind of look at this very dense 7 years of recording activity, and it's like, was this really a thing? And it gets so codified in terms of, well, this is the manifesto for 63 and 64 and 65. You kind of have to go back and really drill down into these little individual moments to try and see what happened. So we just did an episode about From Me to You, which is we kind of thought it was the most unassuming song. Everyone knows the Hey Jude song. Yeah. Is there, or the Hey Jude story, that's the best line in it and all that kind of stuff. But does a song like From Me to You generate a story, and it does, because it's kind of this portal standalone song that gets them from Please Please Me into She Loves You. It's this kind of little inflection point. So it's trying to pull out those little individual moments or dates or threads or people.
Oh, you did a whole episode just about that one song.
Just about that one song.
That is deep end, isn't
it? Because you think about it, you think, well, I mean, sometimes it does become a competition between me and Stephen to see which song or which moment or which topic is the most arcane to try and delve into. So the films of Ringo Starr was certainly an idea that wouldn't die. But from me to you, we kind of think, you kind of think, well, it's probably, if any Beatles song is kind of unnoticed or Beatles single is unnoticed, it's probably that one. But it's also, it comes together when you look at the story. It didn't exist. They're on a tour bus at the end of February with Helen Shapiro and Kenny Lynch. They know that they've one day off in the following week and it's being spent in Abbey Road. And it's the first time that they know that they've an audience waiting for them. They've an audience ready to put that song into the charts.
Yeah.
And so, they're like, okay, we'll sit on the bus on the 28th of February and we'll write this song and we'll turn up the next week and it'll be good enough for George Martin and co. And so, people talk about the chord that goes into the middle eight of From Me to You. That's where they start kind of saying, well, that's a Beatley chord. They kind of really move away from pastiche, and From Me to You is like a Beatles song. You're like, oh, that's their thing. So you start looking at these things and there's, they contain multitudes, as Bob says.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
So when did you've got some Beatle records and objects and things, haven't you? You've dug out.
We do indeed.
So go far away, Jason. What have you got then? Let's start with you.
Well, I've got a vague chronological order to my list. This is, you might have heard of this record.
Yeah. We've had that.
We're only in it for the money.
Yeah.
This is Sgt. Pepper. This is my original 1987 copy of Sgt. Pepper because I was of an age that 1987, I would have been 12 on the 20th anniversary of this album.
Yeah.
And so it was 20 years ago today, hype got to me big time. And from someone like myself, I wasn't really a pop kid. So something like that seemed much more extraordinary and much more interesting and much more exciting. So, if you remember that time, there was a huge amount of hype about, the 20 years ago today. And when you're 12, that seems like an extraordinarily long time ago, 20 years. Yeah. So the 1st of June, I bought in the run up to the 1st of June, 87. And the 1st of June, 87 was a bank holiday in Ireland. So I sat down and listened to this album. And curiously, my parents, although they were of an age, they did not have any Beatles records in the house, so you wouldn't get to being 12 now without experiencing some kind of Beatle album in total, whereas back then it was still go back, buy it. And
so you never heard it before you were 12 years old?
No.
What was your impression age 12?
I thought it was fantastic. I knew who the Beatles were. I'd been on a holiday a few years earlier and I'd seen some footage and I said to my dad, who's that? And he said, oh, that's the Beatles. And I was like, oh, that's the Beatles. That's pretty amazing. Because it was Shea Stadium footage of them being screamed at. And I was watching this footage for a few minutes and I went, wait, was Paul McCartney in the Beatles? Was my follow-up question, because he was the Pipes of Peace guy,
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, how good must this band be? If Paul McCartney's in them, I better check them out. And so to me, to listen to that was Sgt. Pepper. I thought it was absolutely sensational. I listened to nothing else that summer. We had an auto return record player where the arm would just lift off, and I listened to it and I leaned over to turn it off, not knowing what happens at the inner groove. And and just had the fright of my life, because instead of running around, it's like a split second of noise and then the arm just lifted off. So no, I was kind of sold after that. But it so I think in
that'd be very sinister for a 12-year-old though.
Yeah, and we
were talking to Craig Brown the other day on one of these podcasts, and Craig Brown was 11 when the White Album came out, and at school they used to sit at his boarding school. They used to go into a little basement and see, the dare was, could you listen to the whole of Revolution Number 9 in its entirety with the lights out on your own?
Well, I'm reading Pete Paphides' book at the minute. I'm finally getting around to that, and he very much nails that. And it rang an awful lot of bells. This notion that as a kid, some records are sinister or like a tribe. You think by listening to them, they'll take a bit of your soul away.
Yeah.
So I was very much sold on that, because before Pepper, there was a tape of real music in the house, and I could not listen to I Am the Walrus. I thought I Am the Walrus was a sinister, desperately awful,
Absolutely.
Couldn't go near it. So when you're very young, that's the kind of thing that freaks you out. So I totally chime with all of that.
Stephen, what have you got then? What can you kick off with?
I came being much older. I came to the Beatles.
Collection of Beatles oldies.
Yeah.
Oh right, okay.
Oh, wow.
So that's interesting.
This is the copy that I made my mother buy me. My earliest Beatles memory is watching Help on the black and white television, and I have a very of them running down the beach at the end. So I just saw this. I started asking, well, who is this group? And I say my parents were in their early 20s, in sort of 63, 64, but there were no Beatles records in our house either.
They were probably slightly too old.
Yes, I think that was it.
Yeah.
I think
they were like Elvis Presley people.
Yeah.
Yes. And my mother's sister was about 5 years younger. Yeah. And she was into the Beatles, but also the Stones. And very famously in the family, when the Stones came to play in Belfast, my aunt sewed bells up the side, little bells up the side of her jeans, the seam. And my grandmother refused to come out of the shop where she worked to acknowledge her. She hid in the back on her way to the gig. But I think the cartoon aspect of the cover appealed to me. So it was those early songs. As you know, Jason came in at Pepper. I came in with those early singles. Yeah. And for years and
years,
an
interesting place to start. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Dave and I were at our age. You know, we grew up with the Beatles. We were old enough when they started to follow them chronologically. So it's just interesting.
That's I mean, to be able to sort of have heard the singles or anticipate the singles as they came out. Now everything is sort of presented to you, particularly on Spotify. Everything is just there. It's a mass, and you can dip in and out. Yeah. But that notion of being able to sort of chronologically follow their development and the anticipation. But there was no way. This was sort of 75, 76. Yeah. There was no way for me to find out anything about the Beatles. There was no internet. There was no book. I reverted to my NME Encyclopedia of Rock. Yes. That was my...
Absolutely.
You soon exhausted that.
My God, yeah. So which is, in your view, the greatest Beatles... I mean, there are so many of them, aren't there? Beatles book. I mean, which is the one you always go back to?
Oh, well, I think Jason will now produce, my lovely assistant will produce a prop. The Mark Lewison book is difficult to go past. But the book, the most recent book, or a recent book, the recording sections is probably the key text. Lewison's recording sections.
Fantastic. That's actually my second object.
Oh, go on, far away.
I'll move on to that then.
Tell us about it. Yeah.
Well, this is because if Pepper was my kind of musical portal, this is my information portal into the Beatles, so to speak. Yeah. And this came out at the end of '88. I have the original dust jacket here, but it is basically torn to shreds because this is an extraordinarily well-read biography. Yeah. But for me, I was it was post-Christmas '88, and I had some gift tokens and things to spend, and we were in the shops, and we had a family car journey the next day, and I was told, you should get something to listen to and something to read. So I bought this. And the thing I bought to go with it was the White Album, which I hadn't listened to yet. So and feeding back to that thing about records that seemed sinister, I kind of had heard that there was a Beatles song that made somebody murder somebody. So I really was anxious about heading into the White Album. But thankfully, if you remember at the time, U2 had put Helter Skelter at the start of Rattle and Hum, so they'd broken the hex. So I bought the White Album, and I bought Lewison's recording sessions book, and I'm sure you know this book. It's just a diary of what they do day by day. But to me, I was reading about these songs before I was listening to them, and so I was taking in the songs and this kind of dense information at the time. And as a book, it taught me an awful lot because, following on from this, I had my own Tascam 4-track machine, so it told me technological things to do and musical things to do. But you kind of realize how fast they worked, So there's the days when, yesterday I've just seen a face and I'm down, all get done in
all
one
done
day.
The same day. It's incredible, isn't it? And finished.
And just how efficient they were. So you talk about, is there anything left in the vaults? There's really not much left in the vaults. They didn't waste time, which is an amazing part of the story. And I know Lewison has gone on to do so much more for for the Beatles, and he sort of says now he knows there's a lot of mistakes in this book. But I have to admit, from my point of view, this was, I read this book inside out, nonstop.
Absolutely.
The mistakes thing is interesting, isn't it? Because the amazing thing about the Beatles is stuff still comes out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
New bits of information just arrive.
Yes.
Where do they come from? It's absolutely amazing.
I mean, it's, there are I think Stephen will tell you most of those books behind him are all Beatles books. There's so much information out there, and so many people have a story to tell, and you have to admire, Lewison's, desire to try and get as much information down as possible, because, without being sad about it, but we're looking at a horizon of a post-Beatles world, and what's it going to mean in 50 or 60 or 70 years time, and that's what he's trying to capture now with his book. So obviously, when they're done, I think his 3 volumes will be a last word and testament on the issue.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday on our podcast about there's a 19-minute you'll have heard it on YouTube, 19-minute clip of sound clip of the Beatles recording Rubber Soul doing a George Harrison song, the one where Ringo, I think, sings "Lukewarm Baby Got a Custard Face." Do you know that one? And maybe you don't. Okay, it's just to hear 19 minutes of them recording a backing vocal and just making each other laugh and wrong-footing each other and just finishing each other's sentences. It's just thrilling. The speed and the joy with which they work. It's absolutely incredible.
There's no other band that you would be prepared to sit and listen to 19 minutes of them
absolutely
talking.
Not.
The Stones or the Who or the Kinks or even contemporaries. You wouldn't.
It's true. All 4 of them.
Yeah. All 4 of them.
So, Stephen, what have you got? Give us another from your collection.
Well, my this is just another book, which is a 1978 the Hunter Davis biography.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So after I'd exhausted my NME Encyclopedia of Rock, this is one of, I think Hunter Davis puts this book out every 3 or 4 years with an extra 2 or 3 pages, so this was updated to include their solo careers. I think you got maybe 10 pages to cover all 4 of their solo careers up to 1978. But this was a fascinating book, and again, it's falling apart. But because again, there was no way of finding anything out about the Beatles, and regardless of what has come later on how sanitized it was or whatever, he was there. He was an eyewitness. So you have his account of them, sort of writing with a little help from my friends, and he's. He sort of touches on Brian Epstein, the sort of gay bachelor. It's all slightly coded, but that was probably where my obsession about the Beatles as people or as an entity, separate from the music, arose.
And his access is incredible, isn't it?
Hunter Davis' book comes out when? 68, 69?
Yeah.
69, 68, yeah, 68.
And so I haven't read it for years. So Brian Epstein is not out at that point.
No.
Right.
But I think everyone obviously in his inner circle knew. Hunter Davis knew, but he was being. It's interesting to think if Brian had lived, would it have been a little bit more explicit about that and about that side of his life? I think Hunter Davis was being very sort of deferential to his family, to Epstein's family, to his mother at that time.
Well, listen, it was only legal. Now, during Epstein's lifetime,
it
was against the law, wasn't it?
Yep. I think it was 67. Yeah, 67. I think. Yeah. And we
so he lived very dangerously, actually, because he was doing all sorts of
deliberately dangerous.
Oh, yeah,
deliberately dangerously
thrill, didn't it? Kind of associations with young fellows and hotels.
I find him fascinating.
And didn't he go, Dave, at one point? Didn't he go to America with some fabulous-looking guy on his arm, a bit of arm candy?
He took Billy J. Kramer with him.
That's right.
You can't help thinking it was to turn up for dinner with Lionel Bart. The legendary theatrical, gaze, and to be seen with this handsome young chap from his stable.
Yeah.
But no, the story is that Jeffrey Ellis, who was a kind of associate of his from Liverpool, who lived in America, arranged for him to have a kind of a quiet gay liaison. That wasn't enough for Brian. He had to go out into the park in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Can you imagine this? First time in the United States.
I know.
This recklessness that was underneath this buttoned up exterior is just absolutely extraordinary.
Just an incredible thrill seeker.
Fascinating. He's a fascinating character. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, there are one or two biographies, but nothing, I think, that has really sort of captured that complex aspect.
I personally find it fascinating. The whole kind of chucked out the army, fails at drama school, all that stuff, goes back, becomes a success. Yeah. And then sort of starts all over again. Amazing.
Yeah.
It is. It's astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. So, yes, well, look, let's keep it going. Jason, so, it's like a kind of game show now.
A conveyor belt.
Next up, exactly. I've brought, where's my camera? I've brought the Beatles in mono.
Yeah,
on the old CD format. Although apparently people will tell you it has to be bought in vinyl.
It has to be bought on vinyl.
Has to be bought in vinyl. So I think this was almost a reintroduction. So these boxes came out in 2009, and it wasn't that I had stopped listening to them, but I guess I had drifted away. I think getting that mono box was a reconnection, particularly for the very early records. And, something we talk a lot about on the podcast is those early years, because people tend to get very excited about the arguments and, what happened during the Let It Be sessions and, who ate whose biscuit and all the rest. And perhaps that gossipy bit about the end of their career overshadows some of the amazing work at the start of their career. So the mono box, I think something like this is very indicative of where the Beatles are today, because this was the last big Neil Aspinall project, really. And, if you look at that period from the CDs coming out in 87 to these remastered CDs coming out in 2009, he held a very tight grip on what happened in the Beatles universe. And I think these mono reissues sounded fantastic. But it, again, it's another one of these portals, because now we're beyond that, and we've got a different set of people running Apple and a different set of priorities. So we are getting box sets and remixes and redos of the one album and all the rest. But you can't really fault the Beatles in mono. The other thing that's interesting about the Beatles in mono is obviously that it stops. It doesn't give you Abbey Road. And you do start to think about, well, could the Beatles have stopped somewhere else? There's loads of fans that say, well, I've made a 1970 album out of Plastic Ono Band and I've made a 74 album out of all those albums. Yeah, well, why don't you make a 1968 solo album? Why don't you split them up in 67 or split them up after Pepper or something like that? What does that look like? The Beatles in mono doesn't give you Abbey Road, and, maybe it doesn't detract to not have Abbey Road in there. I don't know.
Tell me, I asked this because I haven't done it myself since originally. Have you ever listened to the early Beatles singles on an early Beatles record player?
No, you mean like one of these
Dan sets, or I
Dan sets.
Because surely there can't be any bass. Is there any bass?
There wouldn't be a lot.
No.
It would be really interesting to hear them,
It would.
Yeah. I always say, I always think Phil Spector records sound best at fairgrounds.
Yeah.
Because that's where you heard them.
Yeah.
That's where you heard them loud. You know what I mean? And
I did buy I had a Magical Mystery Tour, the double EP. I bought one of those a few years ago, one of the original ones, and I brought it home, and it was mono, and just played it on my regular record player.
Right.
And you could even sense that this kind of 50-year-old thing, there was still enough coming out of that 50-year-old mono record to think, Jesus, I can't even imagine what it would have been in that time if it's still having
massively exciting, but it's a very different, it's kind of different sound.
It's completely because you miss all that detail, which we've discovered later on, and in the remasters, you suddenly hear instruments that like you're thinking about the bongos on Hard Days.
Oh, it changed my life. Changed my life finding out there were bongos on Hard Days.
I know.
There can't be bongos on Hard Days now. Then you go listen to it, they go, crikey, there are.
Yeah.
The further you go into it, the detail. I was once with George Martin at Abbey Road, and he played me just the bass and drum tracks from Come Together and Something, just those 2 tracks on their own. All the other tracks turned down. I just cannot begin to describe how phenomenal it is.
But what is your favorite? You know, your favorite version? Is it the remastered version? Is it the remix version? Is it the original? The original
Lord,
version?
Gosh!
So you know,
well, the remasters do sound really, really clear, don't they? It has to be said. But I don't know.
For me, it's the I have all of my Beatles records come from 1970s, where the sort of processed stereo on the early version. So that's the version, for example, of Sgt. Pepper that I grew up with.
Oh dear.
So when I listen to the mono version of Sgt. Pepper, the transitions aren't the same, and the transitions seem quite clunky, and you can see the joint, whereas the processed stereo, for better or worse, sort of smoothed everything out.
Really did it?
And that's the version that not necessarily that I prefer, but it's the one I'm most familiar with. So everything else sounds a little strange. Yeah. And you know, Jason talked about the mono version. What they're doing is they're sort of codifying everything. So there's an official canon now. So if you listen to the original versions of If I Fell, you can hear McCartney's voice break a little bit on one of the harmonies. Well, they fixed that. And, you know, so everything has been fixed, and there are odd mixes, and all the American versions have all disappeared. So when you buy the American albums, what you get are the UK versions just sequenced in the way that
as they would have come out in America.
But not the capital mixes.
That's extraordinary.
So everything is just now sort of slightly sterile.
But I would say it's quite an interesting point. Is you see, as I've listened to Sgt. Pepper millions of times, but the version I'm still hearing, no matter what I'm listening to, is I'm hearing what played in my living room, my parents' living room in summer 1960s.
Because that's just the feeling that it reboots.
There's the feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
And you never get beyond that.
No.
Yeah.
You know, you can hear all sorts of other stuff, but that's what you're relating.
I think that's
the whole of the summer of 1986, 1966, when I hear Revolver, I just remember exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's a soundtrack to every event. It's fantastic. Stephen, what else have you got there with your gear?
Well, the first time I saw a Beatle live in concert, I thought that was worth recording, and I have the ticket somewhere, but it's in a frame behind me, and I wasn't prepared to prize it.
No, fair enough.
But
we believe you.
But I have a
I did that. We did that.
I was going to say, you did that. So the first time I ever saw a Beatle was McCartney in Wembley Arena in 1989, and this was sitting on my seat. I imagine you personally, the two of you had.
It was done by Q Magazine, wasn't it, Dave? Didn't we do?
Well, it was McCartney paid for it. He wanted everybody to have a proper, proper.
And you went out, Dave, and visited his warehouse. And I think I'm right in thinking there's a picture of you somewhere wearing the Sgt. Pepper.
I got a Polaroid of me wearing his Sgt. Pepper.
It's lovely. I know. You tried it on.
Wow.
That's good, isn't it?
Because
that's a life event.
He said casually, you know.
We had a meeting to do that because he wanted to do something special, and so he built in the cost into the ticket price because he thought what people got of programs generally was rubbish. You know, where this ought to have some content, and so I had a meeting with them at Soho Square, and I said it'd be nice to have some pictures of memorabilia, or whatever. I said, you keep stuff. He said, oh, yes. He said, just speak to Jane in the office, or whoever it was, and she'll arrange for you to go and look. And so I went with Caroline Grimshaw, photographer, and Chris Taylor, photographer, to an enormous great warehouse, which at the time was in Hackney, I think, which was largely occupied by the collection of Charles Saatchi, who at the time bought up whatever is the Royal College of Art's final exhibition, parked it in a warehouse, thinking it's going to accumulate in value. And then a certain amount of it was McCartney's stuff. And he had the keys to every city in the United States. You know, he had silver discs, he had records from letters from bank managers, all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure over the years he accumulated far more because I think he was probably in the early part of that. I think nowadays everybody keeps everything.
Yeah.
Because they're all thinking, the V&A or God knows what. I think he was quite ahead of the curve in doing that. You know,
it's like Flowers in the Dirt was the first McCartney album that I was buying contemporaneously as a Beatles head, and it is an interesting point in time because that's when the retrospective McCartney kind of really takes hold. And that video from My Brave Face, if you remember that, the premise, it might be a bit dodgy these days, is a Japanese collector trying to get all his gear and get all his costumes and his photos and all the rest. Yeah. And so he obviously did have his eye on the ball. I mean, Neil Aspinall, I think, was very clever. He drove all of that and started putting that together in '68.
He was the one who bought up the rights to all those pictures and recordings. They owned everything, and then they could start assembling the reissue project.
But '89 is when the modern kind of McCartney that we know today appears, where he's putting out an album and he's giving us some Beatles stories at the same time.
Well, that's it. He sort of was embracing his Beatles. Up to that, the Wings tour, you got 3 or 4 or 5 Beatles songs. But here, I mean, the song I remember in my head being the first Beatles song I ever heard played live by Beatles was "Can't Buy Me Love" on that tour. But if I look at the set list, it wasn't. "Can't Buy Me Love" came well into the set list, and he had maybe done "Full on a Hill" or "Hello Goodbye" or something. But the one that sticks in my brain is "Can't Buy Me Love," and I think that's right back to those early singles and that oldies compilation. That's the song.
Sure, it is. Yeah.
That Jason and I saw Paul. I've lost track of time. Was it December 2018?
2018, yeah.
And we went to Liverpool with 2 of our friends, and we thought, go and see McCartney in Liverpool. And he played a little acoustic set in the middle, and he dropped "From Me to You" into the set. And that's the song where sort of all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. But going in, if you had said to me, which song is he likely to play, which is going to trigger an emotional response, that would not have been on the list. No. But just to hear him do something like that, maybe it was the fact that it was in Liverpool, but that was a very I think for both of us, actually, that was the song that.
Well, the last time I saw him, I can remember him playing "All My Loving," and I'm looking around, seeing several people in tears.
Oh yeah,
me.
I can understand it. My favorite bit of that Liverpool night as well was, I think we kind of thought, well, it's he's in Liverpool and it's going to be very serious and heavy, and he's going to impart some wisdom to us. And so he does the whole McCartney show and the fireworks go off, and he's saying some last words. He goes off stage. He says, it's really amazing to be in Liverpool, and it's hard to believe we're back here. And what I really just wanted to say was, and we're like, here it comes. And he was like, see you next time. And some smoke bombs go off and he runs off the stage. And you think, that's what he is. He's just, there isn't any deep sort of Johnny Cash kind of, I'm in my 70s, let me tell you what I've learned type lessons. Absolutely. And you don't want them. People think they want them, but you don't want them.
He played In Spite of All the Danger, which is the very first song they recorded.
It is, in Hamburg. Yeah.
So he gave a little sort of introductory speech, and he said, we had this, and there were 5 of us, and we passed this round until it got to one member of the group, and it never came back, and he kept it, and eventually I got it back, and I had to pay, and he named the price and said, and he's here tonight, and it was sort of like, there was this lovely story, and then it all just came down to, and I had to pay to get that back, but maybe because he was in Liverpool, he get away with that.
Going back to your "From Me to You" thing, I do think it's a wonderful trick that people who've written hundreds of songs can play. Is in the middle of a show, they just go, and there's this.
Yeah.
And you go, oh my God, yes, there's that one.
Yes.
And there aren't many people who got that many songs,
No, I mean, every act has their trigger songs in a live set, you know, and they're usually judiciously placed, second track, second last track.
But to be able to reach back and just pull out these absolutely extraordinary.
There's a huge amount of McCartney fans who are like, why doesn't he play such and such? He's never done Uncle Albert in concert. You can go, fair enough, but you actually look at his set list, they do change year on year about 20%. It's just there's so many hits, there's so much to get through that you don't notice the churn.
That's the thing. If you go to see McCartney, you want to hear the hits. It's like I go and see the Stones on a regular basis, and they play 21 songs, and they tend to be 17 of those songs are the same songs every year. Because if you went to see the Stones and they didn't play Honky Tonk Woman, you would be distraught.
That's absolutely right. I totally agree with them. But I think McCartney's the same. McCartney structures it brilliantly, I think.
Yes, he's very good. He is very good.
Yeah. But the difference with McCartney is you go and see him. There are a load of people who want to hear "Live and Let Die" every bit as much as they want to hear Penny Lane or whatever. Because he's had enormous hits. Whereas the Stones, you can't say that really.
No, that's true.
Stopped having hits. "Start Me Up" is probably the last one that.
The Stones' entire reputation is based on, isn't it, from 63, 64 to kind of, I don't know, 70, 73 or something. Yeah. It's possibly really the 60s, actually, we're being honest,
I went to a few years ago. I went to a McCartney tribute show in Dublin, where a band was doing an evening of McCartney music, and I kind of went with the notion of, well, it'll be interesting to hear certain songs live that he doesn't do live. And sitting at the gig, I understood why he doesn't do a song like "No More Lonely Nights" live. It's because it's very long, it's quite slow, it's very difficult to sing, and it's a wonderful song. The interesting track out of all the tracks I heard that night that the crowd went nuts for, that I wasn't expecting them to go nuts for, that I've never heard McCartney play, was "Another Day." And so it was in a venue of about 2,000 people, and everyone just went mad when they started doing "Another Day." And you could kind of feel, actually, that is a song that he could drop in. I think he should have gone to that gig to road test one or two new tracks for the set list and go, okay, I'll stick "Another Day" in. Because that was another one of those ones, as you said, where he's just like, and there's this one that you've kind of forgotten about. Kind of gallops along,
So Jason, in a kind of Desert Island Discs way, what have you got next to show us?
What have I got next? Well, I do have one more book that I wanted to show, which is "Dreaming the Beatles" by Rob Sheffield.
Right. We were talking about this the other day.
And this book is a bit of a spirit animal for the podcast because, what I like about this book is it's certainly not a straightforward linear biography of the Beatles. It's not something that you would buy to learn the Beatles story. But what it is it's written by somebody who, much like all of ourselves here, has spent years and years and years with Beatle knowledge and Beatle experience rattling around their brain and just figuring out the connections and the bits and pieces that go together with it. And so Stephen actually, made my wife buy this for me as a Christmas present, saying, you really should read this. And I read it, and I could totally understand the psychology behind what he was doing. There's a John Mulaney, the stand-up comedian, has a bit where he's sitting at the doctor's and his mind wanders to thinking of, hey, one day the Beatles didn't have mustaches and then they all had mustaches. What's that about? And I kind of like those moments of, you're trying to draw things together. My favorite bit in this book is where he talks about, why were they having a dinner party with their dentist, which is a very logical question.
That's it. Yes. Who goes to dinner with their dentist?
Yeah. And who then kind of spikes their drink. So when we were trying to put the podcast together, Dreaming the Beatles was this notion that, part of it is telling the story, but part of it is kind of the connection and the effects and ruminating on it. Because the other thing I'd say is, as a kid getting into the Beatles in the late 80s, part of me initially was quite aggrieved that I hadn't experienced it in real time. I thought that's very annoying. How great must that have been? But I now realize that over 30 years have passed, and actually I have been living with the Beatles and I have been experiencing them in real time. It's just a Beatle universe. There's just stuff going on everywhere. And some of it is real time. So, I got to experience "Free as a Bird" as a new Beatles single. Great.
Yeah.
But there's still kind of a long tail of this after effect. And I kind of see it with my own kids now, that just certain stuff percolates into their consciousness that obviously goes straight back to them.
That's because he's brainwashing his children. He's
parenting. No shame there. Absolutely.
I never push my children in the direction of any music, particularly not the Beatles. But magically, they were just at an age when Anthology came out, and Hard Day's Night, I think, had just come out on DVD. And they seized upon this themselves, and they just watched it endlessly because they were just fascinated by the idea of a group who made songs but also had a life. It was the combination of the comedy and the songs. They just absolutely adored it. Not anything to do with anything that I promoted.
Yeah, mine loved the idea that the Beatles apparently all lived together in a little den.
Yes.
And they had their separate front doors, but it was all the same place. And there they were answering their fan mail. And I think that was the magic for them.
But even like that's an interesting...
The whole concept of the Monkees was entirely based on that.
That's an interesting point that David's saying about, they had a life. That Hard Day's Night, you had the singles, but then in the way that other sort of rock movies of the time, it was kind of like, let's do the show right here, or some ridiculous setup, or we're all going on a summer holiday or whatever. The Hard Day's Night, the conceit was it was giving you an insight into what their day was like, and that I'm suddenly thinking we're developing an idea for an episode of the podcast in my head now. Is the success that sort of, is that what sort of copper fastened that sort of early Beatlemania, is that people suddenly felt they knew who these people were.
I think that's the thing I think about more and more. I think about Hard Day's Night generally, and I thought about this because I read a book about the British invasion of the States, and I think one of the key things was the Maysles brothers, Albert and whatever his brother was called, I can't remember, who were just hired at absolutely no notice at all by Granada TV because they wanted them to make a documentary about the Beatles arriving in America. They turned it around in a few days, and it was on British TV a week later, shown twice. And that's the film that then inspired Hard Day's Night, I think. You know what I mean? So,
yes,
a real news event was turned into a kind of drama news film, which was then turned into a drama.
Well, the weird thing about
short order.
The weird thing about A Hard Day's Night, and we've got A Hard Day's Night coming up later in the season. We're looking at the timeline of it, but it's driven actually by American business decisions. So you have, so United Artists are actually making the call towards the end of summer '63. Again, we have this codified notion that the Beatles don't happen in America till '64, which is kind of nonsense. There's a lot of people doing a lot of legwork in '63 in America to try and get them over the line. So for something that, and the movie was kind of almost seen as this afterthought. UA were doing it to get the album.
To get the album, that's
right. Soundtrack.
Yeah, and when Dick Lester, still says that they did it in black and white because they didn't think it was worth spending the money on color. What a wonderful, we all dodged a bullet there, didn't we? Because the reason people love Hard Day's Night is because it's in black and white.
Exactly. I was reading something where Lester went back. I think maybe in '69 or 1970, went back to look at the sort of the outtakes and the sort of the rushes and things that weren't used to see if they could do something with it, and they'd all been destroyed. Because they said, well, why would we keep that?
Why would
you keep that?
And also the chances that film made so quickly with that combination of people who never really, a lot of them worked together, and it was so good, is astonishing, really. You look at their career and everyone talks about the catastrophe of Magical Mystery Tour or whatever. I remember watching that recently. It is not a catastrophe at all. It's actually extremely good. What it is it only a tiny percent, not quite as good as the astonishing high standard of everything else they did.
Yeah, and something like Magical Mystery Tour, we kind of understand what it would be these days. It'd be like a Beyonce video album. It'd be a Netflix special, is what it is. But we just didn't understand what it meant to do that at the time, I think.
No, and also it was shown on, what was it, New Year's Eve?
Boxing Day, 1967. I still remember my parents coming in.
Those were the days of one television in a household. Nobody is going off to another room to watch it quietly. You're sitting there with your gran and your uncle.
Couldn't have been a worse day. Because nobody enjoyed it. The people who wanted to enjoy it couldn't because gran's in the room going, when's the boxing on? Or when's Morecambe Wise? It was awful.
But you see, you go back to Hard Day's Night, and the other thing that just cannot be stressed too hard is that when you went to see Hard Day's Night at cinema, it's the first time you'd ever seen that kind of thing that big and that loud.
Yeah.
You'd never heard it. You'd had a TV speaker like that and a Dan set, So suddenly it was this thing that was bigger than you were.
Yeah.
And it was the most exciting thing you could possibly have. Far more exciting than going to see them live. Because they would be miles away, and you would always
you could see them and you could really hear them, and there was nobody screaming. Exactly. Yeah. Fantastic. Gosh, look, any more items? I can't remember where we've got to now. Dig up anything else you've got.
Any more items? I'm going to shameless self-promotion.
All right, do that. Go on.
That's the two of us at Abbey Road.
Right.
So we'd never been to. I'd never been to Abbey Road, and Jason said, we're doing this podcast. What we should do is a live episode. We should do a road trip. And I was thinking, this is nuts. But what are we going to do? And we got tickets to go and see a lecture at Abbey Road, and we sort of recorded ourselves on the train, in a taxi, and then in Abbey Road, and we managed to get into the echo chamber, which is a room.
Furtively in Abbey Road? Were you in a corner, just sort of whispering?
Yes.
My cousin who helps us put it all together gave me these little digital recorders. So we had the two little digital recorders, and we thought this was a lark that we were recording live from Abbey Road in the echo chambers.
And we were then able to say next week's episode is recorded in Studio 2, and there was about 5 minutes of it. But that was a very surreal experience, because I really had no reaction initially to being there at all. I sort of walked in, and you're looking around, and there's chairs set out, and you can see the staircase up. And I don't know what it was. Maybe I was afraid of letting myself down. I have a good Presbyterian upbringing, so everything was very buttoned down, and I wasn't going to let myself down in public. And it was only in the middle of the lecture that the guy pointed to the corner of the room and said, "That's where Ringo set the drum kit up on day one." And I actually thought I was going to faint at that point, because I suddenly realized...
I know that feeling, yeah.
You were within 20 feet of where they recorded that first song.
And everything's the same. The parquet floor,
it's exactly the same.
The parquet floor is the key thing.
Incredible.
The parquet floor.
Yeah.
So the parquet floor feels like a school gymnasium from the 1950s, It kind of takes you back.
It must have had a certain absorbent quality too.
But the key thing was Jason got to play the chord at the end of A Day in the Life. We knew this. Right. We knew this was going to happen. So we managed to get seats so that Jason could push
on the Lady Madonna piano, is it?
He was able to push old ladies and young children out of the way to get to the piano. And
they looked for a volunteer. They looked for 3 volunteers, because it's 3 pianos played simultaneously.
Oh, right, okay.
So I was like, here we go, and I knew it was an E chord, and they were like, okay, when you're ready, away you go. And so myself and the 2 guys either side of us, we hit this chord, and I swear to God, it was like, oh my God, that's the sound. I'm actually in the middle of the actual sound.
That's fantastic.
And a bit like you putting on a Sgt. Pepper jacket, you think this is a life achievement. This is quite a moment. And this again, just like the album itself, the sound just goes away. But it is the 3 Abbey Road pianos, which is the Mrs. Mills piano and the regular one, they're all played in one note, and you get that jangly E chord tone.
And the upright piano, they really does, the one they call it the Lady Madonna one, it really does have that tone, that incredible tone.
That was the pinnacle of Jason's life. The pinnacle of my life.
The downhill from here.
The pinnacle of my life was watching him do it. That was.
So, Jason, I think we're probably at the end of your supply of stuff.
The only supply I had was the Beatles Brain of Ireland trophy that eventually.
Okay.
This madness,
Beatles Brain of Ireland
will eventually be a plaque somewhere as well. I suppose
it's our own. It's our own plaque. Yeah.
So there's a Beatles regular, festival or whatever you call it, quiz once a year in Ireland. Tell me, is there a similar event for you too?
Who cares?
You're going to press a button here, because
where do you think a lot of people would care?
I like U2, and Stephen does not like U2, and I think there is a general. It's that Irish thing where U2 are not really celebrated. It's a bit of. It's
never celebrated in your own country.
And it's also because it's still together. Now, I just wondered, do people wander around Dublin and go, oh, you see that coffee bar in the corner? That's where Bono
there's a couple of things.
The Edge,
There is a place in Dublin called the Little Museum of Dublin, which is a Georgian house on Stephen's Green, and the top floor is all U2 stuff. Okay. And when people used to travel, or when there were tourists, you would find all the South American tourists would go to the top floor of the Little Museum of Dublin. Down down in Windmill Lane and that area where they've had their studio. All that stuff's been demolished. That's now Dublin's digital docks. It's where Facebook and Google and everything are. So and U2 have got planning permission in for years. They've raised their studio building and to put in like a little 10-story tower that's this big black sort of Kubrickian monolith kind of thing that they want to stick in there. So they've kind of taken away some of that legacy themselves. There is there's
the Phil Lynott. There's a Phil Lynott statue.
There certainly is.
A terrible one.
Collector's item.
It's a shocker, isn't it? People standing there scratching their heads trying to work out who it is.
All rock star statues are a tragedy in my experience. But it's so, you contrast that with, you go back to the extraordinary, preposterous good luck of the Beatles. The place that they're most associated with is Abbey Road, which cannot be changed because it has preservation orders all over it, and there's very conservative residents around there who don't want anything changed. So consequently, people from all over the world can go there and they can cross that zebra. Yeah. And there's nowhere like that. There's nothing associated with U2 in Dublin.
And that's been such an important part of the sustaining of their legacy. What do you think?
It's almost as if they knew that they were going to sign off with Abbey Road, and they're going to take a picture of outside the studio, and it's
them like leaving work.
We're leaving. We're going to leave you with this.
Walking away from the studio for the last time.
But that's the whole point.
And who would have thought that all these years later there'd be a webcam? Which you can watch 24 hours a day, can't you? People crossing. And there is, if we clicked on it now, there would be actually right now.
No, there would actually. Even
today, there's usually about 300 Japanese tourists with cameras around their necks, clambering across the.
Well, we have to say we did that. We did that when we were there.
Yeah, of course you did. We've all done it.
We did.
But it's all part of the serendipity of the story. I mean, you talk about the Males brothers. They constantly. That's the amazing thing about the story that fascinates people, is that all these right moments, all these right people happen, and they happen quickly. They're not particularly thought out decisions. So whether it's getting the Males brothers in, or getting the right team behind A Hard Day's Night, or whether it's just deciding to, that they even the moment of clicking them in step, in formation outside Abbey Road is part of it, because we've all seen all the other pictures. There's about 9 of them. The other 8 aren't any good. That one is the one.
There's only one. There's only one. It's extraordinary.
Now tell me this. Did they ever make a long-term plan that they fulfilled?
Well, that's
Did they ever sit down and go, in 1965, we're going to do this in 1966? Because everything in the music business nowadays is 1 year or 2 year plans.
Yeah.
Everything. Nothing is done quickly. Whereas it seems to me that when the Beatles did have a plan, they abandoned it and changed it for another one.
They had all those plans about recording in a Greek temple,
Abbey Road,
taking the audience with them in a boat, and and it all became impossibly complicated.
I was listening to that only the other day, and it was on. I found it the other day. I was telling you because I was listening to the Let It Be whatever they called it, Let It Be Naked. It's got another CD. Which I'd never listened to, which is just them chatting in the studio during filming or whatever. And John is going, and then we could go to an island, and then a load of people come on the boat, and he spins it, and then George goes, "Oh, that'd be a bit of a drag, wouldn't it, really?" And you're thinking, that's the still small voice of good sense. Yes, it would be a drag. Yeah. And so the idea like that, nothing came of it.
I think sometimes, and you kind of get it from Lennon a lot, is that you sometimes think that the idea is going to do the work.
Yes.
Actually, only the work does the work.
Yes. Oh, that's so true.
And so, you put that up against Paul McCartney living around the corner from Abbey Road, knowing that the work is the work. Whereas, when Lennon's going off to his island on the west coast of Ireland, I think he thinks, well, if I set up a studio there and a commune, and then I'll be able to get the work done that I need to get done. But that's just
never going to happen.
Yeah. But surely that's why their stuff has that spontaneity and freshness, because nearly all of it was just done. It's like Abbey Road is astonishing. You think they decided to get back together and then came in with that collection of songs, recorded songs that complicated, but also that fast.
They were always, working fast. There's kind of the pre-Brian time and then the post-Brian time. Certainly in the pre-Brian time, they're driven by 2 albums a year, and all the singles. So they're just on to the next thing. What's kind of amazing to think of, even at Abbey Road, is how the tank was never as full of songs as we are led to believe. There's this notion that even early on, D'Artagnan and Tony Barrow are saying,
sitting on hundreds of songs.
They've loads of songs. They don't. They're literally always, writing to order, more or less. It's only the only real time that's different is when they come back from India. It's because they've had this kind of lockdown. Yeah. And
it's a songwriting camp, isn't it?
It is. Boot camp.
It's quite. It always strikes me that people that attach the most meaning to the Beatles songs from like Abbey Road and so forth, where the lyrics largely came out of the copy of the Daily Mail that was sitting around.
The poster found in the shop.
How last minute is that? You know what I mean? Then I go, this'll do.
But even From Me to You, get back to From Me to You, that's from the letters page from us to you in, which was Enemy or Melody Maker, one of those?
Something like
that. Melody Maker,
So, they're just looking around.
I think, they as a rule, they didn't make long-term plans. They were little tiny steps. Every step is a tiny step, but it's it's important. And this is whenever we looked at Anthology, it played out the same way. There was obviously intended to be a sort of a plan, a strategy, a marketing strategy, but everything just falls off the table, and they're running around at the last minute trying to get the video done. They're rejigging the running order. The book, the Anthology book, doesn't come out for years after the Anthology comes out.
That's true.
So nothing goes according to plan, and then at the end of it,
that's the great thing.
Yeah, and they seem to make a virtue.
As it should be.
Exactly, they make a virtue out of that. Sort of, they stumble forward into success. I think.
Well, look, we tend to the traditional ending to these events is that we ask people to name the greatest record ever made. But in this case, of course, it'll have to be the greatest Beatles record ever made. So each of you will now be required. What an impossible task!
Yeah, come on,
to come up with today's particular favourite.
Do you want to go first? Or?
Okay, I'll go first. When I was thinking about this, the song that I was going to choose, so you can see there's a bit of a switch here. I was going to choose Lovely Rita because it's one of those underestimated songs. A few years ago, I saw this video of a guy playing it on an acoustic guitar, a Spanish acoustic guitar. And I was like, my God, there are so many melodies packed into Lovely Rita. And, there's this tiny little turns of phrase like, made her look a little like a military man, like kind of, collections of words and writing that it's so dense and compact with melody.
Yeah.
That I think you can kind of look at that and say, here's one you might not know. Listen to this one. However, I was sitting down yesterday and on the radio, I was reading Pete Fetus's book and the radio was on, and on came Strawberry Fields Forever. And you kind of have to think that, that's really some achievement. I mean, it might be a bit of an obvious choice, but you're kind of just sitting there going, the Beatles' great gift was cutting through. You'd watch them on something like Ed Sullivan and they cut through. They actually, get to the point even after all these years. And, you're sitting on the radio and something like Strawberry Fields comes on. You think, my God, that still cuts through an awful lot of stuff.
It does, and the lyric too it's not proper, chiseled poetry. It's just rambling conversation, isn't it?
It's not, and it's
amazing.
It actually also reminded me, now that I have you here, I could maybe solve a mystery because I am pretty certain I saw the Strawberry Fields Forever video originally on Whistle Test back in the mid-'80s. I think it was closed out an episode, and I don't know if that rings any bells, but I remember seeing it at some point on television at that time, thinking again, even the video is a very specific moment. It doesn't look like anything else they did.
Recorded in Kent, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the park, yeah.
And
I don't remember that at all. Do you, Dave?
Do you know, I think I can't remember the specific example, but I think it was around.
Yeah,
because that was.
I'm wondering why we were allowed to do it then.
It might have been the 20th anniversrie. Maybe
it might have been. It could have been 19. Well, would it be 1987?
The start of 87. Yeah,
could have been 87. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It would have been the very end of Whistle Test and promoting the 20th.
It wasn't on a. Tell you what, it wasn't on a Rock Around the Clock, was it? Where people could vote on.
I don't think so, but that was a very formative bit of television as well for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
When BBC Two used to show occasionally music videos way into the night, and you'd see Donald Fagen or whatever. It was great.
It was Frank Zappa, "City of Tiny Light."
Yes,
that was.
It was so funny. We did it.
We
did one of these chats about a year ago with your compatriot Thomas Walsh of
Pugwash.
And Thomas, huge ELO Jeff Lynne Move fan.
Yes.
and he was telling me about how he missed ELO or being on whistle test or something because he had to go to bingo with his mother or something.
And he don't think he ever got over it, did he?
Yeah, but
Still upset.
When he got home, his brother was at the gate going, "They're on." And he just caught the last 30 seconds, And in those days, if you missed it,
you weren't going to see it again. I know. Incredible. So, Stephen, come on. Greatest track.
Well, like Jason, I sort of dithered about this, and initially I thought maybe Ticket to Ride because I just that sound and the sort of that sort of Rickenbacker guitar. But I decided ultimately one of the conceits on the podcast is Jason is very much Team Paul and I'm Team George. So I'm going with the populist choice with Here Comes the Sun.
All right.
Which
the most popular Beatles song on Spotify currently, am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. George was playing the long game there, but I think it's such a simple song. It's such a kind of optimistic song. I like the harmonies, and if anybody asked me, what are the Beatles about? I wouldn't go for All You Need Is Love, or I wouldn't go for Hey Jude. I would always go for Here Comes the Sun. There's something incredibly optimistic about
it's now being enjoying a renaissance in weddings, which I didn't know. Somebody told me that yesterday.
Someone was saying
very popular as the song you play out as the bride and groom are leaving the church or the venue. Yeah. Here comes the sun. Well, it's a really sweet idea. Actually, I never knew that.
I can add that
a sort of post-lockdown song as well. It's
absolutely. Yeah. We're all going outside again.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Now, come to weddings. I was going to say my first dance was All You Need Is Love with the Our World footage broadcast on a giant screen at our wedding, and I realized as it was happening that you can't dance.
You can't dance to that. No way can you dance to that.
It was a good idea on paper.
It was.
No, that would not pack a dance floor, but yes. Very original. How lovely to talk to you both. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
really good. Thanks so much for doing it.
Thank you.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.